From cholera to the plague and the Spanish flu, the viruses that have struck humanity over the centuries have inspired many films and gave directors a lot to work with. But as if that wasn't enough, some people had fun inventing fictitious viruses and imagining new epidemics, each one more terrible than the last. We sincerely hope you are not a hypochondriac because what you are about to see will surely make you sick. Here are the 10 movies that feature the worst viruses in movies, so you can forget about coronavirus. Put your bibs back up, here we go. It is impossible to talk about contagious films without mentioning the one that has marked the entire world of the seventh art with its breathtaking realistic imprint, which has surely made it the most credible film of recent years. Directed in 2011 by Steven Soderbergh, the film Contagion follows the rapid spread of a deadly virus worldwide and the ensuing race against time to try to contain the pandemic. MEV1, the virus at the heart of the story, is similar to encephalitis, and its early symptoms are very similar to those of the flu. MEV1 has an incredible ability to spread at lightning speed, infecting 8 million people in less than a week, and killing the majority of those who contract it in less than 2 days. The director proposes a kind of apocalypse that follows the pandemic itinerary of the MEV1 throughout the world, in a film featuring many characters with related destinies, and which finds in our viral news a disturbing resemblance. Even though SARS had already passed through in 2002, there were great and sometimes disturbing similarities between the Contagion scenario and the current situation. Like the COVID-19 virus, the MEV1 virus comes from China, and its spread around the world is tracked through the character of Gwyneth Paltrow, who incubates the disease in Hong Kong, before flying to the United States and then infecting others around her. As the disease continues to spread at breakneck speed, the global medical community is trying to find a cure. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the first American science fiction film in the saga Planet of the Apes. Released in 2011 and directed by Rupert Wyatt, the film stars a scientist named Will Rodman who is researching Alzheimer's disease and developing a formula for ALZ-112, a kind of retrovirus that could cure the disease. He then creates his variation ALZ-113, a more powerful version but this time deadly to humans. These retroviruses have two different actions: on the one hand, they make monkeys smarter, and on the other, they make humans sick and kill them. For example, at the end of the first film, we can see Will's neighbor, an airline pilot, having the first symptoms of the disease before he gets on the plane. So, he will be patient zero, the first to contract the virus, and also the one who will spread it around him. By the second opus, a decade later, humans are all carriers of the virus and suffer from the disease it causes, the simian flu. Only a few survivors will remain, considered miraculous, whose bodies have been able to adapt and resist the virus. But the virus is constantly mutating and we realize through the films that in its final stage, it will not cause any more deaths, but it will destroy all the intelligence of man as well as his ability to speak. Flu is a South Korean disaster movie released in 2013. It depicts a deadly epidemic that ravages Bundang, a suburb of Sungnam in Seoul. The story begins after the police discover a dozen rotting bodies, crammed into a container, all presumably victims of a mysterious virus. At the same time, a human smuggler, infected with an unknown virus, died in hospital. It will only take a few hours for all the city's emergency rooms to be overwhelmed by the influx of sick people and for chaos to set in. To slow down the process of irradiation of the virus, the local authorities decided to quarantine the entire town, and all the inhabitants were then confined to a safety zone. But panic will eventually take over and tension will rise. Deranged is a South Korean science fiction thriller released in 2012 that offers a total of 109 minutes of intense suspense. The story is based on the same mechanics of amazement as the other films dealing with epidemics but to a greater degree. In Deranged, a deadly virus infects 100,000 of Seoul's population and kills more than 3,000 people. It has the peculiarity of lodging itself in the intestines of the victims to starve and thirsty them. The contaminated, dangerously dehydrated, become uncontrollable and insatiable. To quench their excessive thirst and to hope to survive, the victims are forced to throw themselves into the river or any other water source. The result is a wave of drowning, with hundreds of people intentionally throwing themselves into the river and never coming out. I Am Legend is a post-apocalyptic American horror and science fiction film released in December 2007. Starring Will Smith, playing the role of Robert Neville, a world-renowned scientist who finds himself alone in a New York City completely devastated by a terrifying man-made virus that transforms his infected into vampire-like monsters. The virus was created by Dr. Alice Crippen, who was trying to find a cure for cancer. She then developed a modified version of measles, but after killing 90% of the population, the Crippen virus turned the rest of humanity into bloodless beings and bloodthirsty mutants. Mysteriously immune to the incurable virus, Neville is the last living man to haunt the ruins of New York City, perhaps even the last man on Earth. His mission is to track down these zombies and at the same time try to find the cure. He is surrounded by mutants, victims of this modern plague, who prowl in the darkness, watching his every move and waiting for his first mistake. Having become the ultimate hope of humanity, Neville devotes himself entirely to his mission, to defeat the virus and reverse its terrible effects by using his own blood. Cabin Fever is an AM horror film released in 2002. It features a rotting corpse in the drinking water tank of a small American town, which causes an even more voracious variation of the flesh-eating bacteria. This one attacks a group of teenagers who have rented a cabin in the forest to celebrate the end of their studies and enjoy the last days of freedom before starting their careers. But the party turns into a nightmare when a hermit infected with the mysterious deadly virus appears. The 5 young men will have to face this terrible virus, which has the particularity of devouring the flesh of its victims, sowing disorder and panic within the group. You should know that black fever disease does exist. It's actually called visceral leishmaniasis, and it's a disease caused by a parasite of the genus Leishmania, which is considered the second biggest killer in the world, after malaria, with an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 deaths worldwide each year. But don't worry, this disease is very different from the one in the film. Unlike the film, visceral leishmaniasis does not eat human flesh, but it does cause other relatively serious symptoms, such as fever, splenomegaly and abnormal black discoloration of the skin. This time it is a different virus and indirectly deadly to humans, since its purpose is to eradicate the human race from the earth by causing infertility in humans. The Children of Man, an Anglo-American science fiction film released in 2006, places the viewer at the heart of an imaginary futuristic society prey to chaos. It depicts a world ravaged by pandemics, wars and terrorism, and where the whole of humanity has become sterile. The story revolves around 2 main facts: the death of the youngest person, aged 18, and the pregnancy of a woman, a fact that has not happened for some 20 years. The woman becomes at the same time the most envied and wanted person on Earth. The virus the film is about may not cover its victims, and those infected may not necessarily die, but by making all the women on the planet sterile for several years, it threatens to cause the extinction of the human race. Let's face it, it's still a terrifying sacrament. 28 Days Later is a post-apocalyptic British science fiction film released in 2002. The story is that of an animal protection commando who breaks into a top-secret laboratory to rescue dozens of chimpanzees being abused in scientific experiments. Everything starts from a good intention, of course, but as soon as the primates are released, it is discovered that they were contaminated by a mysterious virus and animated by an uncontrollable rage. The victims contaminated by the virus then find themselves suffering from a terrible form of fury. It took only 28 days for the evil to spread with lightning speed through the city, which quickly became ghostly, leaving only a few survivors and rabid zombies. The cinema has seen hundreds of films in which a damn virus turns people into zombies, but the one staged in Resident Evil not only reanimates the dead and gives them a certain attraction to human flesh, it also causes monstrous mutations. This saga stages the adventures of Alice, the character played by Mila Jovovich, a former security agent of the multinational Umbrella Corporation, who tries to survive in a world invaded by zombies because of a virus voluntarily released by the company. Called Virus T, this virus has the particularity of transforming human beings into cannibalistic zombies. Being a bacteriophage T, which means a virus infecting only certain bacteria, it has been able to acquire, through numerous genetic modifications, the power to parasitize organisms, whatever their nature. In all the vertebrates it touches, the T virus travels through the bloodstream and takes up residence in richly vascularized tissues, such as the brain and muscles, where it proliferates at its leisure. After an incubation period of a few days, the first physical symptoms appear. Parts of the brain are then attacked and then destroyed, and the frontal lobes dissolve, leaving the brain in a very primary state, and finally taking control of the infected individual's behavior. The virus also damages the hypothalamus and plethora, which induce psychotic rage and bulimia in victims. It then moves to other parts of the nervous system, causing an excessive release of endorphins, destroying all the senses, especially the sense of pain. The victim becomes dehumanized, initiated with the spread of the virus, which destroys his memory, his mind, leaving him with only one instinct, the one of survival. A survival that requires a supply of proteins, precisely from human flesh. But that's not all. The danger of the T-virus also lies in the fact that it infects other oxygenated tissues such as the victim's muscles and skin, which begin to necrotize as soon as the victim is contaminated, to the point where he or she can no longer move. All these symptoms, combined with the brain damage, turn the victim into a living dead person, or if you prefer, a zombie. The T-virus also has the particularity of being transmitted through body fluids and mucous membranes, such as saliva and blood. A single contamination can lead to several others and reach an entire population before the virus takes effect. The only way to exterminate the virus is by euthanasia or destruction of the brain. So, tell us in the comments which of these fictitious viruses is, in your opinion, the worst of all.